Hello out there, this is Nicole Hemsoff, editor of HPC Wire, here today with another in-depth interview session. So today we're going to be talking with Scott Houston, the former CIO for Weta Digital, which provided the IT infrastructure that powered the stunning visual effects for the Lord of the Rings films. Scott's currently the CEO of Greenbutton, which is one of only a handful of companies that identify as an HPC cloud-driven company. So welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to be here. Hello, everybody.
So we talked, I think, back in 2011 at the Supercomputing Conference about many of your experiences on the Lord of the Rings film. Can you give us a sense of the background, what some of the decision-making processes were when they were looking at different IT solutions?
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting journey for me, Nicole. In fact, back in 2003, the cloud really wasn't available, so we literally had to go out and buy 1,000 processors for one particular shot. It's the Battle of Pelennor Fields. I still have shivers up my spine every time I see that shot. It's actually midway through the movie Return of the King, and it's when the 14,000 riders of the Rohirrim, the sort of horse warriors, clash on this battlefield with 83,000 orcs. And the reality is, even though we had 4 data centers and close to 2,500 processors, we literally had to go out and buy another 1,000 processors and build a brand new data center just to get that one shot done right at the end of the production of the movie. And it was at that time, at the conclusion of the movie back in 2003 and early 2004, that I realized there had to be a better way. And in fact, that infrastructure was sitting idle at the end of the movie. The next production for Weta was King Kong, and so we really didn't need those extra 1,000 processors. So I formed a consortium called the New Zealand Supercomputer Centre, and we rented out time in that. We did some biotech work, we did some seismic processing, we helped render the movie Happy Feet. But the problem was, for a number of our users, they just wanted to run small jobs, and so that's really where the genesis of Greenbutton was born. That I saw an opportunity in the market to create some software to automate the process of using this capacity on demand, well before the cloud came around, and that's been great. And the fantastic story to close that loop, Nicole, is that today we're working with a company in Mexico that is rendering a full feature animation. It's a full-length movie that is rendered entirely on the cloud. So in the future, CIOs and CTOs that are making movies and doing, large computationally intensive projects may not necessarily have to go out and buy that capacity in the future.
Right. So what's the status of the New Zealand Supercomputer Center now? Are you running a balance between research scientific workloads and entertainment media workloads? Where does that stand?
No, that environment was shut down in 2009, and we've been sort of cloud only since 2009 onwards.
Okay.
So today we have jobs running on Windows Azure, Amazon, vCloud environments, and recently, earlier this year, we announced support for OpenStack.
I see. Just curious then, since you've been heavy users from the beginning of both Amazon and Azure, I know that you and I had that discussion. What do you think some of the differences are, advantages, disadvantages between those platforms? I know it's a little difficult to say, but where's the advantage, say, with Amazon over Azure, and where's Azure's advantage over Amazon?
Good question. I think we have customers in, I think at last count it was 77 different countries. So in many cases, it just comes down to geography. Where is the nearest data center, and how fat can I, what is the bandwidth of the pipe to get to that data center? So a number of those decisions are driven by where is the nearest data center. Almost invariably, they're technical decisions. So from a pricing point of view, from a support point of view, I think they're much of a muchness. We do have workloads that run on Amazon, and primarily, one of them is a seismic processing on-demand service that we had called Cloud Claritas. And that's running on Amazon primarily because Amazon supports 10 gigabit Ethernet. The application is MPI based, so So that's, so that has driven that decision based on the technical requirements. Sometimes it'll come down to memory. So there's new large memory instances on Azure now. Some of those workloads were running on Amazon, and some of those have been ported over to Azure. There's a company that's just set up called Profit Bricks. They have InfiniBand support, and to date, not many other cloud providers have InfiniBand, so we're starting to test some workloads running there. So to answer your question, often it will come down to the geographic location of the customer, and then also the technical performance or the requirements of the workload.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're talking about seismic processing, for instance, not only is that computationally intensive, it's data intensive, and if you're talking about using public cloud resources, I would imagine the data movement costs would be pretty significant. How do you balance that out?
Yeah, good question. Well, the reality is, and I'm embarrassed to say this, when we're talking about moving 20 or 30 terabytes, which is a large-scale 3D seismic processing run, we literally still ship the drives, and you can't beat the bandwidth of a FedEx truck, to be honest.
Right.
But interestingly enough, we've developed a product which is part of our Cloud Fabric product called CloudSync, and so it's a downloadable tool that will, in the background, move the data to the cloud, and we've just added an FTP capability that will use UDP protocols and do bulk upload. And we've just done some recent testing. We're getting close to 2.4 gigabits per second. That's theoretical performance, but that means I could technically, in the right environment, move a terabyte of data in under an hour with the right connection from the customer site to the cloud. And that may be, that will start to be a game changer. I think we're starting to see, increased bandwidth into the data centers. There are more cloud data centers. And so I think that will be overcome, not today or tomorrow or even this year, but over the next couple of years, I think that bandwidth problem will be solved. And, the whole concept of Greenbutton is you push the green button from within your desktop application and your job will start running. Well, clearly we need to get the data there. So our Cloud Sync tool manages that data synchronization in the background so that when you push the button, hopefully all of the files are there and we just do a quick synchronization and the job will start running.
Right. And that problem you mentioned is one that everyone's trying to tackle. It seems pretty tricky. The theoretical performance you just cited there is pretty impressive. What's the actual performance based on some use cases?
Well, we'll be launching the product later this month, so we'll probably go back out. The reality is it will clearly depend on what sort of connection the customer has, and so that's from their ISP, from their network provider into the data centers. Many of the data centers have large pipes into them, so it's actually going to come. It will come down to the performance from the customer to the data center. Mm-hmm. But we've just started working with a company that is putting in a dedicated pipe between their facility and the cloud provider. So I would think in a couple of months we'll have some real world use cases.
Okay, that's interesting. We'll keep our eyes open for it. Let's talk about Greenbutton, the company, for just a second. So let me make sure I have this straight. You're a platform as a service company dedicated specifically to HPC workloads. And I know today you had an announcement around maybe higher-end analytics services. Can you describe the company's focus in terms of the types of applications and needs that you're serving specifically, and what is it that makes Greenbutton unique and distinctly HPC oriented?
Yeah.
There's four questions in there. I'm sorry about that.
And often it depends who we're talking to. We're early at this growth stage, and HPC hasn't been sexy. It's always been sexy to me, Nicole, but it hasn't been particularly sexy in the marketplace. The growth in the industry hasn't been particularly investable, and I know we have an HPC audience. The interesting thing for us, we don't just focus on rendering, seismic, genomic sequencing, Monte Carlos, and CFD. A number of our customers, and I think we just had an announcement today, one of our largest customers is in the social media space. So really what we look at Greenbutton is any type of workload, but it has to be computationally intensive. Interestingly enough, we're doing a lot of work in video indexing. So we're taking an hour of video content in and then and using, key algorithms and processing that video and making that indexable. And that's not a traditional HPC type workload, but it is a big compute workload. And that's a product that we've created called Incus that uses an algorithm from Microsoft called Mavis. So it's not just traditional HPC. We've got social media customers, we're processing video, yes, we're rendering movies and we're doing seismic processing work, but we've also been putting some work into running Hadoop workloads and big data analytics through our Greenbutton Cloud Fabric engine as well. And so for us, it's not just a particular vertical market. It's anything that's computationally intensive or big data intensive. We can take that workload, run it on Greenbutton Cloud Fabric, and deploy that workload to any cloud platform.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, and that comment that HPC's definition is expanding sort of beyond the research scientific computing workloads. That's I think getting more and more common as data intensive, computationally intensive sort of merge. So but when it comes to cloud computing, especially if you're using a public cloud resource, the concerns really don't change. They get more intense actually, whether it's computationally intensive or data intensive, where there's a performance gap. And so people that require high performance have to really, I would imagine, take a very, very close look at whatever cloud service they're going to use, because they're taking a pretty big hit on the virtualization side, data movement side. How do you help customers work through that, and how do you prove the ROI of this over certainly just buying a bunch of infrastructure, which is a big upfront cost?
I think that's an ongoing process. The reality is, and from early on, we've talked to customers because they'll run a job on their local server environment, then they'll run it on the cloud, and they'll go run slower. And there's no denying that. One, we have to get the data up there, and there's nothing like a dedicated environment that's running in their own data center. That said, we're seeing significant investment from the cloud providers in their infrastructure. So while there may never be parity in running the job off-site from a high-performance dedicated environment on-site, from a financial perspective, it really does make sense. And I think for the sort of workloads that we're talking about, it would be a very brave CIO to say, I'm going all into the cloud. And I've been in the cloud for 10 years, and I'm not sure if I'd say that if in their position. The reality is, though, the cloud makes a heck of a lot of sense to take specific workloads that either take a long time or they're very bursty, they're only project-based, and use the cloud to scale out the business. So I'd encourage IT managers, use the cloud to support, either very intensive workloads that, they really don't have either the bandwidth or the capability to run in-house. And not necessarily just go, right, we're all onto the cloud. We'd love to talk to those folks, but I think we're still really a couple of years away from, the cloud being, all-encompassing and customers not needing data centers anymore. And so to give you an example of that, a number of our customers are using Greenbutton to render their jobs. And I did say one of them is they're rendering the entire movie. But most of our customers will have really hard shots that the workloads, the render jobs will run often for a matter of days, and they're able to take those jobs, run them off-site and on the cloud, and continue to use their data center more efficiently for smaller jobs or jobs they need a quicker turnaround on.
I see. Okay. To go back to some of the use cases we talked about earlier, you said that you're seeing a lot of growth on the social media side, on the analytics side, big data, whatever that encompasses. It's very big. What are some of the emerging markets that you think balance computationally intensive workload needs with whatever advantages the cloud can offer? Where's the real hot growth right now?
Well, it's a little bit of both. We can't talk about this customer publicly, but they're a Fortune 500 manufacturing customer, They have a large Monte Carlo simulation that was running in their internal cluster and taking 3 hours to run. And we're able to take that workload using Greenbutton Cloud Fabric and spin up 1,100 processes and have that job completed in under 10 minutes. And that's a traditional HPC workload, and just the power of spinning up 1,100 processes and running that job and getting that turnaround under 10 minutes is actually quite transformational for this customer. So we're certainly seeing great growth in traditional HPC workloads. That's in biotech, seismic, rendering. We're starting to see CFD workloads. We have a customer in Germany that is doing fire dynamic simulation, and that's a traditional HPC MPI-based workload, and they're running those jobs in the cloud. But also balancing that are some really interesting opportunities around video and social media. The press release you'll see on our website today is with a company called Tout, and effectively they provide 15-second video tweets, if you like, through the mobile phone, and they're using Greenbutton to provide analytics for those customers. You know, what sort of things are they talking about? What are the themes? What are the ideas? What are the hot subjects? So balancing out the traditional HPC workloads are a whole lot of new workloads that are computationally intensive, but not viewed as traditional HPC.
I see. Interesting. In a case like the manufacturing one that you cited just a couple minutes ago, cloud pricing is already tricky enough to figure out for a lot of users. How does this layer factor into pricing? How do you work this out? Can you describe it generally, at least?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is it's pretty darn cheap. And this particular workload, just think about the economics of it. Well, if I'm spinning up 1,100 processes, most cloud providers are now charging by the minute, and I want to run a job in under 10 minutes. Well, that's $20 or $30 to run the job. So to take that turnaround from under 3 hours to 10 minutes, and it costs $20 or $30 to run the job, and they negotiate that with their cloud provider. That's a pretty compelling return on investment or business case to make. Mm-hmm. So the challenge, I think the challenge is for the cloud provider in that the pricing is so darn attractive for the end user. The end user just pays for the compute and storage they use for the particular job. It is becoming more and more compelling for many customers. The challenge for the cloud provider is how will they make money out of that. And if you think about what's happening in the cloud, we've seen the transition of the SaaS type applications or hosting websites, and the cloud makes good sense for that. Increasingly, organizations are using the cloud for offsite storage, and that makes sense. Neither of those are particularly profitable for the cloud providers. The real money and profit for the cloud providers is in on-demand computational work. The challenge for them is around utilization. So if they can ensure their cloud is fully utilized or even sort of 80% utilized, it's a profitable business. So how do you attract enough customers to keep that utilization? And it's a win-win if you can do it both. From a customer point of view, if I'm only using the cloud, 10 or 20 or 30% of my time, it just makes sense. In fact, the analytics that we're doing now with current cloud pricing, it's almost 50%. If I build a data center and I'm running it less than 50% of the time, depending on my licensing costs, it may well be cheaper to run those jobs on the cloud with the current pricing model. So that's an interesting tipping point that I'm sure most CIOs and CFOs are considering at the moment.
Right. So as with everything in high-end infrastructure, it all depends. So pricing, and you name it.
I think I don't think anyone would argue that the pricing is compelling. The biggest problem, and the problem that we've been really focused on, is governance. Anybody that is running their jobs in the cloud, hopefully they're having a good experience. What is a really bad experience for people is managing not the costs, but where to appoint the costs. So if you get a bill from a cloud provider today, and it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or anybody, it's like a phone bill. You've got no idea who ran the jobs, what department they were working on, what project that was. Did they have authorization to run the jobs? Many, I'm sure most organizations, they're running their jobs on the cloud and they're using the company credit card. So for an IT department and a finance department, wrangling with those costs and apportioning those to a user, to a project, to a department is an absolute nightmare. And so we've been working very hard at providing governance. And one of the things, and we've just recently been granted a patent on it, is our ability to profile a job and provide an SLA commitment in time and cost. We think that's unique, and I think that that's going to be the game changer, and perhaps the tipping point for broader utilization in the cloud is how long will it take, how much will it cost, and then really apportioning that to the correct department, user, project.
Right. So governance, I think, warrants its own individual show and coverage area. It's a huge topic. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we are bumping up against our time limit. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I will never watch Lord of the Rings the same again, too, now that I've had those conversations with you in depth about some of the rendering challenges that they faced. It really changed the experience. So thank you so much, and we look forward to keeping up with what goes on with Greenbutton over the course of the year.
Thanks, Nicole. We'll see you at Supercomputing, and thanks for the opportunity.